Hello and welcome to Draft Day. My name is John Fleming. I am one of the hosts of Draft Day. This is usually the part where I say that I'm joined, of course, as always, by my co host, Jason Bradshaw. But Jason's not here tonight, or today, depending on when you're actually listening to this. I am joined instead by a friend of the podcast. You may remember him from our 2013 NBA draft. He is back for another round of NBA drafting. It is the man, the you're not a myth, you're a real person. It's P Funk. How are you doing, P Funk?
I'm good. I am a real person. Last I checked, doing all right. Did a little research. Excited to do a little drafting here and maybe go over some trades.
Yep. We are going back to the NBA well, which we're kind of breaking the order that we've kind of done a specific order of sports on the show, but NBA draft is if you're listening to this when the episode comes out, NBA draft starts tonight, so that should be exciting for everybody. There aren't, as far as I know, any feature-length movies that are about the NBA draft, so we don't have any reviews of those, like with Draft Day, because frankly, the good title is taken already. But we are going to reminisce about a particular draft in NBA history. It is a draft that I would say is not the best draft, not the worst draft, but it's fine. And the primary reason that I wanted to specifically have Mr. Funk here on to talk about this draft is it is a draft that is very near and dear to your heart because you are a fan of the Oklahoma City Thunder, which is a team that did not exist when this draft took place. By the skin of their teeth, it didn't exist, but it did not exist when this draft took place. It did exist by the time the next season started, but this was a formative moment for the Oklahoma City Thunder. It was the 2008 NBA draft. Now, P Funk, you're not from Oklahoma and you've never lived in Oklahoma, so you're like obviously they're one of the closer teams to St. Louis, but they're not like the very closest. It's not like an obvious everybody in St. Louis roots for the Thunder kind of thing. What was it that got you into the Thunder?
Well, ironically enough, it was Kevin Durant, which I remember when he ended up leaving. A lot of people kind of asked me, are you staying on? Are you going to remain a Thunder fan? Um, it was kind of a crossroads point for me. I did go ahead and stay on. I kind of at that point I had met some people through Twitter. I felt a kinship with OKC had a basketball team, nothing else. We had other sports, but not basketball. Both a couple smaller, big cities, Midwest. So it kind of played out perfectly to kind of add them as officially as my team. So stuck with that. And obviously Kevin Durant's done his thing since then, and we wrote out this rebuild. Now we're looking pretty good.
Yeah, and the Durant thing is interesting because obviously they were the thing that got you into following the team, but also there were, you know, 11 to 14 other guys, whatever it is, that were still around whenever he left. So it's like, yeah, you could follow KD to the Warriors, but one, where's the fun in that? Because I think everyone kind of knew what that was going to be like. But also, like, you had a relationship with these other players, including a player that's going to become quite notable in this redraft.
Couple
And
players for that.
yeah, so I would venture to say that I would not say that the Oklahoma City Thunder had the best draft in the history of the NBA in this draft. I would say they had the best draft of anyone in this draft. But I think the importance is not just the picks they made, though they did make some good picks. There's a couple of Oklahoma City Thunder legends who will be coming up as we draft here through the lottery. But I wanted to just kind of go through all of the sort of the mechanics of sort of how the Thunder became. Like, it would be stupid to call them a dynasty because they've not won a championship in Oklahoma City. They haven't been to the finals in 12 years now, but they are really set up for potentially a really strong run in the next few years. Like, they might not be the very top team I would pick as far as like who's next 5 to 10 years I would want, but they are in the conversation certainly.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you look at the foundation of the Thunder currently have, you pretty much have a big three of Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, Chet Holmgren, and Jalen Williams. And two of those three players are a product of a trade tree that begins on this night, kind of. Like the trade itself actually happened in the summer of 2007, and that trade was cheap Robert Sarver wanting to unload Kurt Thomas's contract and paid 2 first rounds picks for the right to do that. That would definitely not happen in today's league, but it happened in
So
2000.
So I actually don't like. I was following the NBA, but I wasn't following it closely enough at this point that I like really was familiar with this trade because like Kurt Thomas was like an okay player, but he was not somebody that was like leading off Sports Center with the Kurt Thomas trade. But so Robert Sarver was, and up until recently was the owner of the Phoenix Suns, who at that point were like legitimate contenders. That was like Steve Nash, Amari Stoudemire. I guess Sean Marion was still probably around at that point. So they traded so they traded Kurt Thomas, 2 first round picks. I assume they were unprotected first round picks, though. They probably figured it didn't really matter at that point because they were so good. But so did they get anything in return, or was it literally just a contract and 2 firsts for nothing?
They got 1 second round pick.
Okay.
I believe it's like like you technically have to throw, even if maybe it's cash considerations even, but I think even you have to throw in a pick. Sometimes the protection on that pick might just be like it'll be like top 55 protected. That's called a fake second. That's usually referred to as a fake second because if it's top 55 protected, you're probably not getting it. But yeah, it was Kurt Thomas 2 firsts, one of which became Serge Ibaka. The other one might have been Eric Bledsoe that they ended up flipping, if I'm not mistaken. Um, but yeah, Serge Ibaka was the one that becomes now. They draft Serge in this draft. He doesn't come over until the following season. His rookie season is technically with James Harden and not with Russell
Yeah.
Westbrook. But he ends up coming over that following season. Plays, 7, 8 good seasons with the Thunder, and then at that point flips at the 2016 draft. He gets traded to the Magic for Oladipo, and the pick and becomes Domantas Sabonis.
Yeah, and for some perspective for anybody that isn't really that familiar with this trade tree, 2016 would have been that it would have been the draft. Would that have been immediately before Durant left?
Yeah,
Or was that
that
immediately after?
was that was right before he left. So because the draft
Okay.
always comes before free agency in the NBA. So
Yeah.
the idea was, I mean, you're in your head, you're thinking like, okay, well, Oladipo with Sabonis. There was the smoke about getting Al Horford possibly to pair with that core, which would have been, you want to talk about a potential dynasty. That could have been one right there. Obviously, it didn't pan out that way. But the funny thing about that is Rob Hennigan was the GM of the Magic at the time. He originated from OKC. He is now back working for OKC again. If you follow the NBA at all, the Orlando Magic in the 2010s didn't really do much. So it's trades like that, because you trade those two guys for Serge Ibaka. You get a half season of Serge Ibaka. He makes it clear he's not resigning in Orlando because they're going nowhere. And they end up flipping Serge Ibaka to Toronto for Terrence Ross.
Yeah, and what's funny about Oladipo and Sabonis, they were both former first round picks, and we talked about Oladipo's draft for 2013. He's was a number 2 overall pick, not somebody that you would consider to be number 2 overall pick quality, but like still very much a first round player. And Domantas Sabonis the same way. And it's just very funny that like first round picks led to more first round picks because Ibaka was just kind of, and he was like late lottery. So he late lottery or was he late
Oh no,
first?
he
He
was
was
he was in the 20s.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
kind of,
So
'cause I'm pretty going back in that time, my Thunder fandom really hadn't taken off yet at that point. They were the Oklahoma City basketball team. When I'm pretty sure when they played that first summer league, they didn't even have a name yet. Just Oklahoma City.
interesting. Okay. So they're
They
kind of
hadn't
doing
really
like what the Utah hockey team is doing for their first year, where they're like, we're just going to call ourselves the Utah Hockey Club or whatever it is.
they hadn't nailed down their mascot and team name and everything. So, but yeah, so
Yeah.
then the Magic are kind enough to trade OKC that package. And this is where people remember that, Oladipo and Sabonis for Paul George. And then, of course, Paul George ends up in that monster trade with the Clippers, and that's where you get SGA, a bunch of picks, one of which is Jalen Williams. There's still 3 picks to come,
Yeah,
I
we should
believe.
probably like kind of zoom in on the summer of 2019 for the Thunder. So 2018-19, the Thunder made the playoffs and they were like a 4 or 5. Does that I didn't actually do any research on this, but
They
they were
were,
in the playoffs, but they were considered like fringe contenders at best.
yeah, they were. I believe it was 4 or 5 because I believe, yeah, because that was the year that the Blazers ended up going to the conference finals against the Warriors and get swept. Blazers
Yeah.
beat the Thunder along the way. Paul George was an MVP candidate, arguably leading in the clubhouse at the All Star break. And the Thunder were like the 3 seed, pushing for the 2 seed. And then there was the first game out, he hits a game winner against Utah. And then the next day, they're like, oh, Paul George has a shoulder problem. He's going to sit out the next game. I didn't really think much of it, but pretty much that was at like the 2/3 season mark. I didn't know at the time he was done being MVP level Paul George. He was going to be pretty good Paul George from here on out. But
Yeah.
this team had found, because Westbrook obviously won the MVP 2 years ago. Westbrook had found his niche as secondary scorer, primary playmaker. PG was putting up like 29 a game. Jeremy Grant was the role player. You had Steven Adams here. You had everything, all the roles fit. But if PG's not going to be the 30-point per game scorer, now Russ, of course, is more than willing to step up and take more shots. That wasn't necessarily great.
Yes, that is something he's known for.
They flame out in the playoffs in 5 games. The infamous Damian Lillard shot. Paul George not calling it a great shot. Buddy, he hit it. It doesn't matter. And that was the last game of the Paul George Russell Westbrook era.
Yeah, and I don't think we specifically said it, but Russell Westbrook was also part of the 2008 draft. He was the actual pick that the franchise earned through not being very good. He will come
It is
back up again.
it is weird. You always see that picture of him in the Sonics hat.
Yeah, and never once played a. I mean, it's a little bit like the Kobe and the Hornets hat, but even more crazy just because like Russ didn't get traded for another
Right. He
over
didn't change
decade.
franchises. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, so at this point, the Thunder are looking like they're a decent team. They're probably not considered to be like up to like the Warriors level or anything, but they had these two big star players. Paul George, who like you said was an MVP candidate. He was I believe he was first team All NBA that year. He was like a superior player who was really kind of at like the peak of his ability. You had Russell Westbrook, who at that point was like in his early 30s, might have been like
Russ
31 or so at that point.
Russ still made it third team All NBA, I believe. PG was first team All NBA, third in MVP voting, third in DPOI voting. Monster
Yeah,
season.
that is
Couldn't
a
have come at a better time for the Thunder, as it turned out.
yeah. So what ends up actually the big factor that kind of influences kind of how the Thunder summer looks actually doesn't really have anything directly to do with the Thunder. It has to do with Kawhi Leonard, who Leonard had just the season before been traded from San Antonio to Toronto, won the title with the Raptors, but now he's a free agent. Makes it pretty clear that he's not really that interested in going back to Toronto. But
He
he's
wanted
interested.
LA. He wanted LA in some capacity, and there was actually an article that Ramona Shelburne of ESPN wrote that comes out a year or two down the road that actually kind of ties everything together. Westbrook had actually thought that maybe this ran its course, and he caught wind of Kawhi wanting to find a co-star to team up with in LA and talk to Kawhi about that. Kawhi, I mean, I don't know if this happens all in 10 minutes or something like that, but more or less, Kawhi is like, oh, things aren't going great in OKC. He calls Paul George. And that's how that ends up playing out because Kawhi would rather play with Paul George and Russell Westbrook. I frankly don't blame him at that point. And once, the agreement they kind of had was Paul George would re-sign like he did in the summer of 18. And if this ends up not working out at some point, we can look and make a move and work with you to get you to somewhere else if this starts to fizzle out. Well, that was Paul George saying, hey, guess what? This fizzled out. So the Presti and the Thunder, Paul George made a remark that said that it was mutual. And while they worked with Paul George, Presti made a point to say this was not mutual. And the Thunder were fully prepared to run that team back one more time. I would say it worked out in their favor that it played out like it did.
Yeah. So what was the Paul? What was you mentioned it briefly before, but like what were the pieces of the Paul George trade? So the idea was that Paul George was going to be traded to the Los Angeles Clippers, and that Kawhi would sign there, and it would be the Kawhi and Paul George show, which was interesting because the Clippers had just had a very like you know not sustainable, but a very like fun kind of spunky playoff run where they like took a game against the Warriors on the road in
2 games. 2 games total, 1 on the road.
okay, yeah, that's it.
That's
And
gonna be fun.
who was their best? Was like Lou Williams their best player at that point? It was like a very you didn't see this coming kind of thing.
You
Like
could
the fact,
yeah, I mean, they still had, because Gallinari, who was part of that trade, Shea was starting at that point, Lou Williams, Patrick Beverley, Montrezl Harrell was a big part of that team playing the center.
okay, yeah,
Just a
Harrell, I
little
remember
bit of
being
a
there.
scrappy, like a I don't know, in a way, like a really poor man's Pistons, where like nobody's really the 2004 Pistons, where nobody's really like that top dog, but it's a bunch of pretty good guys, and the chemistry is great, and so they're battling out there, and they
Yeah,
took 2 games off the 2019 Warriors, which is pretty impressive.
yeah. So I missed so that game. One of the games that they won against the Warriors, it was the one that they won in Golden State, and it was played on tax day, which I work at a accounting firm, so I had like a tax like party that evening. I got home, I kind of checked on the game. I saw that the Warriors were leading, and I was like, well, the Warriors are obviously going to win this game. So I went to bed, didn't think anything of it.
Yeah,
Woke up the next morning, I checked the score, like, what on earth happened? Like, what is this?
yeah,
And but yeah, they decided to rebuild.
yeah.
They decided that that was not gonna they weren't gonna run that back. So what did Oklahoma City get for Paul George? And I want to know what your reaction to the return was when it happened.
All right, so the return was Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, Danilo
Yeah.
Gallinari, and it was 5 picks and 2 swaps. Now, 3 of those picks were the Clippers picks, 2 are swaps, because you can only trade so many of your own picks and swaps. 1 was a Miami pick, and then 1, I believe, was this Philly pick that Oklahoma has coming up. Now, the Miami and Philly picks haven't um, conveyed yet, and they've done other trades that kind of mucks up my memory of all the of which ones are which, and they flipped a Clippers pick. That's one of the Clippers picks are down the road. So they've done a little, but it was 5 picks and 2 swaps, all unprotected. All the Clippers were unprotected. The Miami one's interesting. So it's lottery protected for this coming season for the 2025 draft, and then
Okay.
if Miami makes the playoffs, then for 2026 it's unprotected. So it's a weird
That's
it's a weird rooting interest there.
well, I think at that point you probably are just rooting for them to make the playoffs, and then just hope that like Jimmy Butler realizes he's in his 30s, and then you kind of roll with that.
Bottom
But
falls out, exactly. I am definitely rooting for that. So my reaction, the one time, because this happened when I was down at my family has a family reunion every 4th of July, and we don't do it anymore. We used to do a yearly float trip. So with this float trip happening, getting up early in the morning on a Saturday, getting going, Adam for one time in his life goes to bed before midnight on a Friday. And so when this broke, it broke at like 1 in the morning Central Time, and I was asleep. And I sleep with my phone on silent. Nobody's disturbing me. I'm sleeping, whatever. Yeah, I wake up at 7, and I've got a lot of notifications for 7 a.m. on Saturday. And it wasn't, like I missed some party. I had missed a gigantic trade. The first one, I'll never forget, the first notification I saw was a Facebook message from someone I consider an acquaintance. Like we're cool, but like we're not really friends. We don't talk like that.
sure,
He's
yeah,
messaging me. I frankly thought he got duped. I thought he got done in by a bad source. And as I start digging more, obviously I find out this is very real, and this all happened. And yeah, it was that Russ is getting traded too. Like this is the end. That's kind of the big thing. Like okay, Paul George got traded. This is a lot of draft picks. Shay's intriguing. I don't in my mind I'm like okay, well I guess Shay could be like the third best player on our team possibly. Obviously I underestimated that, but
yes.
I was just kind of like, man, it was just like I spent the day just like I'm on this float trip and just like, all right, this is like what's going to come of this? What are we going to get for Russ? How's Russ going to, there was times during that day where I'm on this float trip thinking, okay, well maybe Russ will stick around, and like obviously that was never going to happen.
I mean,
So in this,
there was precedent for Russ sticking around in OKC and just kind of just doing everything by himself for a little while.
yeah, but
But at the same
I mean,
time,
yeah, we
he
tried that
was
once.
younger then, yes.
Yeah, we tried that once. That net zero playoff wins. So yeah, it was just kind of, like, well, I guess we're going to see this rebuild through. Then Russ gets traded for Chris Paul, somebody I did not care for. That didn't sit well, but at the same time, then when that season plays out and Russ is kind of struggling at times, and Chris Paul looks great, and
Yeah. Well,
the
because at the
Thunder
time,
got
because it
heat.
was like that trade when, because I remember when it happened because a mutual friend of ours who was obsessed with just saying trade Russ, even though he didn't like care about the Thunder at all. I was with him when that trade happened, and him just it was like a religious experience for him. But like the idea wasn't that they were trading Westbrook for Paul straight up, just because like they thought Chris Paul was better or anything. There was this idea of Russell Westbrook still has value. Chris Paul seems like he's cooked. So we're gonna do this trade. It's gonna make us worse, but we're also going to like get some more future assets and kind of build from there. And then Chris Paul just straight up outplayed Russell Westbrook that year, and it was wild.
It was wild, and that 1920 team probably ends up with a couple more wins than either Paul George team if they play out a full 82. They were on a 50
Yeah.
win pace, and those Paul George teams were winning like 47 games or something like that. So I was with, if you recall, my friend Brett that came down for the Mizzou game.
Yeah.
I was at his rehearsal dinner, and I had actually been kind of checking my phone, just thinking like, I feel like something's gonna happen. I feel like something's gonna happen. It's like a 5 minute break where I'm not checking my phone. He hops in on his phone. He sees it. He just looks at me. He goes, "Check your phone. You better check your phone." I'm like, "Oh,
Oh
what
boy.
happened?" Right? Like, oh god. We were at I don't know if it was Luminati's or it was some like famous Chicago pizza place where we had this dinner. Dude, I had to take a lap. I had to take a lap. I could not believe they just traded my most beloved player for my least favorite player in possibly the whole league. Bottom five, easy.
Yeah.
It was
Chris
it.
Paul is Chris Paul's such a fun player to evaluate because on one hand he's like a Hall of Famer, he's a great player.
Yeah,
On the other hand, like he seems like a good guy and like other players seem to like him. But he is just such a prick to watch play. Like
He
it
he
is a
he really is, and that's why I hated him. Now, in this season, I grew to appreciate him some. He's got a great relationship with Shea and with Lou Dort, and I respect that. And I think that's played a role in Shea's development. That can't be discounted. Then once he went to the Suns, it's like I'm like, I don't like this guy much, but it him being on the Thunder this season took the edge off, if you will.
it's a little bit like the how Wes Mantooth feels about Ron Burgundy. He's like, I hate you with every fiber of my being, but damn it, I respect you. Like,
Yeah, yeah. There was some respect gained in that season with Chris Paul. So that all worked out. Chris Paul netted, there were the kind of more trades and flipped him for another pick. I think, but that's Chris Paul turned it more or less turned into Poku, which is pretty funny.
yeah, the Chris Paul thing is like arguably, and this is again arguably the misstep that they made because Chris Paul's value just kept going up. In the
Yeah.
moment, in the moment, it was like you got to get rid of this guy like while he has this value.
When what I will say for that, could I think that Presti could have extracted more value in theory on that. But what Presti did do, and what he did with Al Horford, who he also probably could have gotten more value for, he did make he did move those players to somewhere they wanted to go. He didn't just trade them to the highest bidder. And
Sure.
Presti, what I do like about Presti in that regard is if you hear Chris Paul talk about him, if you hear about Paul George talk about him, even Kevin Durant, all these guys, I don't know if James Harden feels the same way, but pretty much everybody else. But I mean, who does James Harden get along with? But all
Fair.
these players all speak very highly of Sam Presti. Having a good reputation like that around the league is very important and will pay dividends down the road. So while he didn't get max value, maybe I have no qualms with how he handled it.
Yeah, and the Paul George thing could benefit, and to some extent the Durant thing could benefit the Thunder this offseason too, because I was with you a few days ago and I checked the betting odds on what team will Paul George play his next game with. The favorite's the Clippers, which makes sense because it's the team he's on, but number two is the Thunder. Like it's a possibility, which the possibility of them getting Paul George back and pairing him with Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. So Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, when Oklahoma City acquired him, I think he was second team all rookie. He was like he showed some flashes. Like there was some like sign of, hey, this guy might be better than his draft position, which was like late lottery.
Right.
He has since become a lot better than that. He is quite possibly, I would even dare say, quite probably the best player in the NBA from the Americas right now.
Yeah,
Um,
I think so.
Yeah, like I think that it would like you would say him or like Tatum probably, but like I think that Shea Gilgeous-Alexander is just kind of like he's almost like a super version of Russ in some ways. Like he's just really good at a lot of things. He's somebody that can be a primary scorer. He's somebody that can pass really well, and he was. And honestly, like I didn't really know that much about him whenever they traded for him. I just saw the picks that they were getting. And I was like, okay, that sounds great. And the a lot of first round picks, pick swaps for anyone that's not like a huge NBA follower. There's a rule in place that you're not allowed to trade your first round pick multiple years in a row. So the way the teams kind of get around that is they do what's called a pick swap, which basically just means whichever pick is lower and lower meaning better, the team can acquire that, which has resulted in some good draft picks for the Thunder. So they haven't just gotten Shea out of this.
The biggest thing with Shea, like Shea had the handle, the quickness, the shiftiness. He could get to the bucket. He has worked tirelessly on his shooting,
Yeah.
and his shooting has come that was kind of really the big thing was like he doesn't seem like that good of a shooter. He can maybe hit some spot up threes, but like he's not. He's become a killer in the mid range. I've talked about this before that he had a step back against the Mavericks in that last game with like the season on the line, basically. And they have, of course, ended up losing that game, but it's like a minute left, down four, and just like he's in the gym by himself, step back three from the top of the key, all net. And that's just not a shot he's really hitting a few years ago, especially certainly when he came over. So
Yeah, and like you were saying, whenever they acquired him, you're like, oh, maybe he can be like part of like a top three for a team, and like I guess number one is part of a top three because like all due respect to Chet Holmgren and Jalen Williams, aka J Dub, not to be confused with J Will, the other Jalen Williams that's on the Oklahoma City Thunder, but like all due respect to those guys who were like really good players, like Shea's the guy, like he
the
is
guy.
he's the franchise guy, and it's hard to imagine a scenario where the Thunder would win a championship next year and Shea's not team MVP, not like the Finals MVP. Like it would be a little bit like Iguodala winning with the Warriors, kind of. That's weird. If even somebody like Chet Holmgren, who I think has like all NBA potential, were to do it.
Yeah, I mean I was talking about somebody this last night about how hockey has a playoff wide MVP and the NBA does the finals, and that results in things like Andre Iguodala and Tony Parker winning awards that
Yeah.
maybe they shouldn't have.
Well, what's weird is that like with the NBA, it's not always the best player on the winning team, but it's usually the best player on the winning team. Like more times than not, it is. Like whereas if you were to do like the MVP for the Stanley Cup Finals this year, I'm not even sure. Like it wouldn't have been McDavid. It would have been like Carter Verhaeghe or somebody. Like it would have
Yeah,
been not the probably not the best player on the winning team type thing.
right.
So remind me, was is Chet was not part of the trade tree, correct?
Correct. Chet was just straight up tank job, number two
Yeah.
pick.
Yeah, and like you could argue that that's sort of like indirectly part of it because of like the way that like the team kind of cycled. And there's this weird perception among a lot of like NBA like blogosphere type people that make it seem like the Thunder are analogous to like what the 76ers did for a long time with the process. They were bad for like a year and a half. Like it's not even in the same stratosphere as
You're not
some of
you're,
the
you don't
other.
hear it as you don't hear it as much anymore. But I mean, the funny part about that is like like Detroit was bad on accident for years, and it's not like Detroit doesn't get criticized, but they don't like it's not this whole because yeah, did the Thunder like hold Shea out of some games they could have played in probably, and they definitely sat Al Horford. That was in part to frankly spare Al Horford, and I believe the
Yeah.
Boston Celtics thanked them for that. But yeah, as you said, it got blown out of proportion.
Yeah, but like, even like when people criticize the Pistons now, they're being like, "Hey, the Pistons are dumb." With the Thunder, it's like the Thunder are immoral. It's like
Yeah, it's like all
this is
right,
a
man.
blight on the
Yeah,
sport. Yeah.
right. It's like the alternative is they keep pushing and they're the Chicago Bulls for eternity and fighting for the play-in.
That's very uncalled for, but we don't need to break down the Alex Caruso for Josh Giddey trade. It has nothing to do with this draft. But yeah, we'll see how things turn out because like I don't consider myself an Oklahoma City Thunder fan, but like they're a very fun team to watch, and obviously you being a fan of them, you've kind of swayed a lot of our friends to become fans of them, and so like it's
It's
hard
the way
not
to do
to
it.
like during the series against the Mavericks, I didn't learn to become an Oklahoma City Thunder fan, but I did learn to hate Luka Doncic as much as you guys did, which it's like I remember hearing, I can't remember who it was. It's like Gary Marshall or some like old time like producer in Hollywood was like, yeah, during the time I was at UCLA, I never really learned to love UCLA sports, but I did learn to hate USC sports. So I feel like I got that out of it. It's like that
Yeah,
kind of effect for me.
there you go.
All right. So anyway, the 2008 NBA draft. Speaking of UCLA, there's a couple prominent UCLA players who are going to be near the top of this draft. We'll get the ball rolling here. I decided that since one of these players is truly your one true love, I decided you can go first because otherwise I'm going to take him. So go ahead. You have the number one pick.
Yep. Russell Westbrook, point guard, UCLA. Pretty easy call here. MVP, multiple time NBA, All NBA, All Star, Olympic gold medal. Pretty much done everything you can, triple double records. Done pretty much anything but win a ring. He'll be a first ballot Hall of Famer. Somebody that he can lift the team. If he's the best player, your ceiling is a little bit lower, but your floor still you're still like
Yeah.
mid 40s wins. So and the durability with Russ. Obviously he had a couple meniscus issues right after Harden left. A couple years there were kind of rough, but other than that, that dude answers the bell. Still does. I mean, there were times with even those Lakers years that weren't great when LeBron and AD would be sitting out. Russell Westbrook was out there playing. So a lot to love with Russ. Pretty easy pick, and that's that.
Yeah, he's definitely the pick, and kind of an interesting thing with him is just like the way he became like sort of like the identity of the Oklahoma City Thunder after Durant left, and a lot's been made of the triple doubles and like the fact that he was just like completely going out of his mind just to get like the rebounds needed, that kind of thing. People would kind of make fun of that. But like also, if you're a point guard who's averaging a triple double, I kind of don't really care how you're getting it. That's a pretty good sign that you're really good. And the fact that this guy who's like an extremely LA guy, somebody from Los Angeles who went to UCLA, I mean, the guy was just, at the Kendrick Lamar concert last week, being like the face of LA along with DeMar DeRozan, who's an SC guy, granted, but like we're like for those couple years where he just becomes like the heart and soul of that Thunder team. And like I think he's like the ultimate like heart and soul guy in this draft, and honestly one of the ultimate heart and soul guys like of the modern era.
Yeah, and I think we as Thunder fans really got an appreciation for and a knowledge of his leadership role and how he literally was the leader of those teams. Like when you saw the years after Durant left, and you saw the leadership role that Russ took with the Thunder and somewhat with the Rockets, but even with the Wizards, he was a big leader that one year. Whereas you look at Durant and frankly the lack of leadership in the places he went, Golden State, I don't want to say he was along for the ride. Obviously, he was getting buckets, but like that was that the leadership was in place. He just had to join. And then
Yeah,
when he had to leave and when he had to lead in Brooklyn, we saw what happened.
yeah. There's kind of a finite ceiling, and like to be clear, Kevin Durant is like an all-time great player.
Oh
Like
yeah,
if you're
this,
saying like
this is
greatest
strictly a
players,
leadership perspective. Durant's not really that
yeah.
leader.
Like to me, as far as like greatest players of the 21st century, the argument like LeBron's one, and then you're going either Durant or Steph Curry for number two. Steph Curry is like the ultimate like culture leader guy, and Durant is just like a guy.
Is it you said of this century?
Am I forgetting the guys that were drafted this century? I guess
Okay,
I'm. Yeah, I mean, there's guys like
got it.
Tim Duncan or something like that towards.
Tim Duncan was
But
immediately getting like, all right, draft of
I
this
mean,
century is Tim Duncan. Got
some people that aren't me would throw Kobe in there, but yeah. So anyway, yeah, good pick. The legendary Seattle Supersonic Russell Westbrook.
of course.
The number two overall pick, I'm going to go with the legendary Memphis Grizzly Kevin Love. He was drafted by the Grizzlies. He subsequently was traded. Another USC guy, part of this mix, OJ Mayo. They actually got Kevin Love plus other things for OJ Mayo, which is wild. But Kevin Love was and he kind of had two different stages of his career because Kevin Love, those first few years with Minnesota, was sort of one of those perpetual kind of thinking of like, oh, if this guy is putting up such huge numbers for this terrible team, if he were on like a better team or in a bigger market, had more eyes on him, people would realize like how great he is. And then he gets traded to Cleveland and he becomes like basically a role player, like a really good role player, but he's no longer like that guy. And he was very valuable to that 2015-16 Cleveland Cavaliers team, and has had kind of a longer career than I thought he would. There was a period a couple years ago where it seemed like he was just like barely hanging on in the league, and now he's with, or at least last year was with Miami. I'm not sure what his contract status looks like now, but somebody that can be kind of like a back in the rotation kind of guy. But just in terms of his numbers, he's averaged a double double for his career, 5-time All Star, 2-time second team All NBA. Um, has that ring with Cleveland, though. I think that's an example of why I don't necessarily think of rings as being like, not that they mean nothing, but that like he was the third best player on that team. Like Russell
Right,
Westbrook, like it took until the last few years really for Russell Westbrook to be not the first or second best player on his team
right.
after a very long stretch. But yeah, Kevin Love is my pick there. So
Strong pick. He had those 2 years, like the last year or two in Minnesota, where he had really, because when he first came to the league, he didn't shoot threes much, and then there was like
yeah,
that last couple years in Minnesota where he's still the monster rebounder, but add to the 3-point shooting. It was like It was unfortunate they couldn't get a team around him because he was just such a monster. Um, I think I do think that his peak play before he became a third guy does get lost in the shuffle a little bit.
and like this is a guy who got traded for two number one overall picks, and granted, one of them, had a year. We talked a lot about Anthony Bennett last time. Like it was pretty obvious at that point that he was no longer considered number one pick caliber. Like maybe you get like a late first for him or something. But like Andrew Wiggins came in with a lot of hype, and
Yeah, he did.
Cleveland was ready to make that move. And granted, there's a little bit of the Paul George with Kawhi situation where you're kind of making a move to appease the big signing that you have, but
Yeah,
I think he was still definitely a good player.
yeah.
All right, you're
Third
up at
pick.
number three.
Yeah, this. I mean, we're kind of already at a crossroads. But I did have to go with the MVP, the one MVP
Yeah,
left on the board. All said and done. Obviously, Derrick Rose. It is kind of a putting aside the off court stuff. That's kind of a different conversation. But when you look at his play on the court, him being an MVP, the stuff he did at such an early age, it's unfortunate that he had that knee injury that just never the same after that knee injury. Um, but those first few years, he had in his rookie year, the Bulls played the Celtics in a tough series.
Oh yeah, I have
Um,
very fond memories of that series.
that 2011 campaign, he wins MVP. They get the top seed. They do end up falling to the Heat in the conference finals. 2012 top seed. He was in the
Uh,
MVP
yeah,
conversation again, and then unfortunately the knee injury happens in the playoffs, and for all that, and for as bad as things seemed at times, he ended up carving out still a solid overall career. Now, will he be? I don't believe there. I believe every MVP is in the Hall of Fame that has been eligible. Um,
yes,
this,
and there's a very distinct possibility that Derrick Rose will be the Jose Teodoro of the NBA, the trailblazer that's an MVP that doesn't make it.
yeah, he's probably not going to make it. That's just kind of unfortunate circumstances, but his talent level, the things he did in his first few years, he's still going to be the number third pick for me.
Yeah, I will say he's had a longer career as like a bench player than I ever would have guessed, which
And
like the fact that all three of these guys, like if you had told me, 5 years ago that all of these guys would still be in the NBA 5 years from then, I mean Russ, I'd be like, yeah, sure, that makes sense, but would not have guessed with Kevin Love or Derrick Rose, but
I
they're
would have definitely thought for sure one of those two would be out. Now, Derrick Rose could be on his way out at this point. I believe,
yeah, played this year
he was
though.
on. I had to think he was on Memphis, but I had to think
I
about
believe,
that.
yeah,
He was hurt a lot again. This could finally be the end of the road. But the fact that he's still in the league, like you said, I am surprised he made it this long.
yeah. He's a guy that received MVP votes in 3 different seasons, which is second most in this draft class behind Russ. Um, I think if I'm looking correctly, the entire rest of this draft of guys that haven't been picked yet, there's a combined one guy that's received MVP votes. So yeah, but yeah, obviously didn't have the sustained success that you might want. If you look at like win shares of value over replacement player, he's not number three on those, basically just because he just didn't have it for a sustained period of time. But it's hard for me not to go with like peak because he arguably has the highest peak of any of these guys. It's him or Westbrook. But
Yeah,
regardless, like obviously Westbrook, was a good player for so much longer that I'm not gonna like try to pretend that he would
right.
go ahead of
But when we're
Westbrook.
talking
But
MVP,
yeah, it's if you have a guy who was an MVP, it's hard not to take them like extremely early.
right?
Yeah. So good call. Uh Now gonna drop off to a guy that was not an MVP, has never received MVP votes, has received Defensive Player of the Year votes a couple times. Was a first team all defense in there. I'm gonna go with Lopez.
Okay.
Brook Lopez is the all-time leading scorer for the Nets franchise, which is an absolutely like insane thing to think about because not somebody that you think of as being like the highest volume scorer in the world. I mean, he put up some points, but he was not 16.1 for his career. Not bad, but they've had some better players. I guess those better players haven't typically played there. And I guess like Julius Irving out of an ABA. I'm not even sure if that counts towards the totals, but also that's only part of his career.
Right.
But more of a kind of a sustained player, but kind of an interesting case of a guy that seemed like he was like very much over the hill. Like when he was with the Lakers, it didn't seem like there was a whole lot of tread left on the tires. But ends up going to Milwaukee, kind of reinvents himself as this center who can put up 3 pointers and can be like this really big part of like that kind of the winning culture of that team. Like you could argue that with that Bucks team, outside of sort of the quasi big three of Giannis, Chris Middleton, Drew Holiday, you could argue that Lopez is kind of number four in that mix in terms of like most significant, most important players on that team, and a guy who, like I said, he was a two-time Defensive Player of the Year vote recipient. He was made two All Defensive teams, including a first team, and probably not somebody that you want as your best or even your second best player if you're trying to compete, for a championship. But you could do worse as far as like a guy to have as part of a championship team, and like we saw that he was able to fit into that role while being past his prime with Milwaukee. And I think that had the like Grand Nets experiment with Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce and Darren Williams worked out a little bit better. Maybe we're talking about him in a different light, but I think he was number 4 on my board, so he'll go number 4 in this draft.
He made 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. In his first 8 seasons, he made 3 total 3-pointers. And then in his last season with Brooklyn, I guess I actually kind of want to look this up now. He must have had a conversation with somebody about longevity and the way the league was going. Because then in his last season of Brooklyn is when he started the 3-point thing and made
Yeah,
134 threes that season, shot at 34.5%. The Lakers, I would frankly argue, screwed up letting him walk. That was they flipped D'Angelo Russell for Lopez. That was the whole after he snitched on Nick Young. Remember that whole episode?
I forgot about that actually. Yeah, but no, you're right. But
At that point, D'Angelo had killed his any standing in that locker room. He had to go. So
yeah,
the Nets took a chance on him as a young guard. The Lakers got Brooke Lopez. That would have been a nice big to have next to LeBron James and Anthony Davis if they had held on to him. To your point, he was. I don't think it's a debate. He's definitely that fourth most important player on that Bucks team. They don't win that title without him because his drop defense and his rim protection allows Giannis to be the roamer, and that's how
yeah.
that defense works. So he's somebody that I would like the Thunder to look at. I know that there's been some smoke that he might be available. I think especially if like Al Horford came off the bench for the Celtics this year a lot. If Porzingis was healthy, Al Horford was coming off the bench. If Brooke Lopez is willing to come off the bench like that, I think he'd be a great fit for this current Thunder team.
Yeah, I kind of feel like the Bucks are going to keep one of Lopez or Bobby Portis, but they're not going to run it back with both of them again. So
It does have
I
that
think
feeling.
that that could be the case, and I think you could. I think Portis is probably a little bit better at this point, but also Lopez you get a lot cheaper, and maybe the Thunder could try to package some of their 700 second round picks for guys. Not
Yeah,
sure what the
well,
exact cost will be.
yeah, I'm good throwing some seconds. The Thunder have, I think it's like 2029 seconds just alone, just in that draft. There's some seconds
Yeah,
you coughed up.
yeah. Not to dig into the Caruso Giddy trade, but it really is funny that the Bulls couldn't. I think they could have just asked for a second round pick, basically as like not even a tip, but like just like a bow.
I
Just
really feel like
what do
I
you?
really feel like Presti throws one in if you just ask.
You can theoretically do pick swaps with second round picks too, right? You could be like, hey, take my worst second round pick. Like, what difference does it
Yeah,
make? Who cares?
yeah. There's definitely there's a couple of if you look at like there's like these websites that like break down all the future draft picks that and it's like it'll be like the worst of like and it'll list off like 3 teams. It's like this is I'm into the picks and all, but like it's getting over my head. I don't even need to know all these scenarios on a second round pick, but you can do it.
All right, you're on the board at number 5.
I will go with another Thunder legend here, Serge Ibaka.
All right.
Um, perennial all defense guy with the Thunder, tremendous shot blocker that similar to Lopez was a mid range guy, kind of to begin with. Lopez had always been a better shooter than Ibaka, but somewhere where he slowly but surely expanded his range out to the 3-point line.
Yeah.
Um,
Former Bucks teammate of Brooke Lopez too.
Also true. I wasn't a long time Buck, but he was there.
It sure is not. No,
No, but he did win a title with Toronto.
he did.
Um, as we stated, he was traded. Presti struck at the right time on that trade. He really wasn't. He was still solid, with Toronto, but the elite shot blocking days of OKC were already kind of on the decline. And He was going to want a big contract. Presti obviously didn't want to pay him that, and at that point, you make the trade. So, but long NBA career. I believe he played in Spain this year. I'm pretty sure. I believe his NBA days are over at this point. But
Yeah.
nice long career, solid veteran. About it right there.
Yeah, and we kind of have this run here, and it's going to continue on with my next pick too, of just like guys that are high end role players. Because like Serge Ibaka is not a guy that you're building your offense around. Like you mentioned, he improved his shooting, but he's not somebody that was necessarily considered like the linchpin of an offense. So he averaged 12 points per game for his career,
Yeah,
less than assists per game. Which granted, he's a center, but not
I will
exactly.
say you were mentioning about the high level role players, and as I kind of went through this draft, I was actually surprised at the depth of this draft. There's more than I thought.
Yeah. So whenever Jason and I did the 1984 draft, I mean, obviously the headline was, the four, inner circle Hall of Famers who go off the board right away.
Right.
But then it really falls off like there's a like Allen Robertson or something like after that. Like you still have good players, but like
Cam
by the time we got
Perkins.
to the end of the by the time we got to the end of the lottery, it was like, well, whatever. Let's just yeah. All due respect to Thunder legend Michael Cage, but
That's why I always say when you talk, people, the three drafts people bring up are 84, 96, and 03. And to me, the depth of 96 is just unmatched.
yes. Yeah, we'll eventually do. I'm sure we'll eventually do 96 and 03.
Yeah.
03, once you get past, honestly, like there's four Hall of Fame guys. There's David West, and then after that, it's I guess Corver's in that draft. Is he right?
Yeah. I believe a second
Yeah,
rounder. But there's some similarities with 03 and 84 being super top heavy and then a
yeah.
steep drop off.
And also the fact that like the top guys all like went early
Yeah.
kind of does add to sort of the mystique of it. Yeah. So Serge Ibaka, a good pick at number 5. For my number 6 pick, I'm going to go with a player who is, I would say, not dissimilar to Serge Ibaka. Even worse offensive player, 8.8 points per game for his career. Under 50% free throw shooter. Not it's admittedly not what you want, but he was a two-time all defense first team. He even made a first team all NBA, which I find crazy considering his lack of offense production. He made a couple third teams as well. DeAndre Jordan at that number, and like obviously a player who extremely limited in terms of his offensive game. No question there, but a very strong defensive player. Like there's a reason that Brook Lopez and Serge Ibaka went ahead of him. It's because they were not complete zeros. Lopez especially, but like
Yeah.
DeAndre Jordan is kind of the equivalent of, this might be a little bit extreme, but a little bit of like a Ben Wallace type where like he was not going to like it's weird that DeAndre Jordan's because was DeAndre Jordan in the NBA this last year? He's definitely been in like fairly recently.
He was still on the Nuggets
He was
last year.
to Denver. Okay, yeah. Like I feel like he's like an endangered species. Like once DeAndre Jordan retires, they're just not going to be guys like that in the NBA ever again. Just guys with just absolutely no versatility, no offensive acumen, but a superior rebounder, a great defensive player in his heyday. People seem to like the guy a lot, which isn't nothing. Like obviously, we're gonna tend to go by stats when we're doing these drafts because we don't personally know these players, but the fact that he has a like good reputation around the leagues helps out.
Yeah, by all accounts, DeAndre is all vibes first team. When KD and Kyrie went to Brooklyn, they both took a little bit less than a max and carved out a contract for a semi-washed DeAndre Jordan.
Yeah,
And
certainly not a player of their caliber, if not
no,
washed. But
ended up making it was either 3 years or 4 years at 10 million a year. He had no business getting this contract, but they love the dude. And
yeah,
they said, I mean, in effect, it was the same amount of money that they were going to pay Katie and Kyrie anyway. So I mean, I guess no harm there. Um, Kenny Atkinson might think otherwise because him not starting DeAndre Jordan over Jared Allen is one reason why he ended up getting fired in Brooklyn.
Yeah, that
Um,
there's a lot of moves adjacent to that you could ask some questions about. And
DeAndre
then
Jordan is your quintessential rim running big. Sets the pick, run into the rim. One of the all-time great poster dunks was set up off pick. Chris Paul comes off the screen, lob to DeAndre Jordan, dunks Brandon Knight into the arch crust. Like you said, not much variety to this guy's game. He's not really. I mean, he had a jump hook. I mean, he's a classic old school big. You know, you could do a jump hook over either shoulder. That's about it. Um, I do think, like you said, bigs are going to have more versatility in their game. They're going to have to shoot, going to need to pass, handle the ball, something. You can't just be a rim runner and that's it. Um, you
he's
know,
very much a guy who, if he had come into the league, 20, 30 years earlier, it would have seemed a little bit more right than than coming in 2008. Whereas, like I mentioned, the Ben Wallace comparison. Ben Wallace, I would argue, came into the NBA at the like exact perfect time because,
yeah,
like, if he had come in earlier, he'd have been way too short. Like, even though he played bigger than his size, it would have been, a problem. But also, if he come in later, he wouldn't have been able to shoot. So that would have been a bit of an issue in the modern game.
it'd have been a real struggle. I mean, Lob. I think people when people think Lob City, they primarily think Blake Griffin. But
Yeah.
I do believe DeAndre Jordan had more dunks and more lobs in that time. Um,
I mean, dunks were
so
kind of his entire offense, so that does sort of make sense.
so he's got some nice posters to his name though, and solid big, great career. Especially when you're talking about a second round pick. Um, no complaints there for him. And he got his ring as a backup. I know him and Jokic have a good relationship. Um, yeah, just a quality pick right there.
Right. Number 7.
I had this list, and it's just like I could honestly pick like 3 or 4 names right now from where I'm at. I am going to go with a another Thunder legend though. Let's keep that going. Danilo Gallinari,
Yeah, good call.
picked by the former Nick. He ends up as kind of a really the cornerstone, I guess, of the Carmelo Anthony deal. Um, that the ill-fated Carmelo Anthony deal. They could have just waited probably and signed him, but they trade half their team, including Danilo. And Danilo kind of bounced around. He was in Denver for a few years. He ends up going to the Clippers. Ends up in the Paul George trade. He's kind of, actually had a pretty solid season with the Thunder. Has not really done a whole lot since.
I
And
want to say I'm not positive. I think he might have been maybe second to Chris Paul in terms of like a lot of the advanced metrics, like VORP, win shares type stuff for that Thunder team. Like you said, it ended quickly thereafter, but it was one of
yeah,
the
and I get why it doesn't seem like because he was there were the trade deadline of that 1920 season. I think the Heat wanted him, but I don't know if the offer wasn't enough, and they ended up holding on to him. I think there was like a sign and trade for like a second round pick to Atlanta. Did not really do well with Atlanta. He,
I was just
uh,
thinking of the Thunder need another second round pick.
yeah, he ended up
You know,
getting
just a
hurt with
fist
Boston
bump.
too. Yeah. Oh, hey, give me all the picks. I mean, I don't care at this point, but there was definitely like a 3 year period there where it's like, sure, I'll take another pick. Pile them up. You cannot have too many picks. Um, but yeah, Gallinari, kind of a at the time, there weren't like a lot of 6'10", like you in theory a 6'10" is a big man, but he really wasn't a big man. He was like a small forward, great shooter, could handle a little bit, not really a defender. But man, that dude could shoot, and I'll take that shooting on my team all day. Yeah, I enjoyed the one season that the Thunder have with Gallinari. He's also got this really hilarious theme song by a group named the Italian Stallions. If you have not looked this up, you need to look this up.
That sounds vaguely familiar. I can't quite piece it together, but it sounds like something I've heard of before.
And if I remember correctly, the Italian Stallions are not Italian at all. and are of a different European nationality.
Is Mike Tirico in the group?
Mike Tirico, no, I said it's not Italian. I said they're not Italian, so Mike
Okay.
Tirico's Italian. Can't be in the group.
So that's a real if you know you know kind of joke there.
That is a good. That's a classic one right there. But
I'm
yeah,
not going to go
Gallo's
into
my
explain it
choice,
further.
and I don't. I think it's about it for Gallo.
Yeah. Number 8 overall pick. I am going to go with the guy that is let's see, he's 6th in win shares in this draft class. He is 3rd in VORP, and I have absolutely no idea how. Uh, I said with DeAndre Jordan, I was going to go off of vibes. This is a guy where I'm going off of what VORP tells me because I am not totally sure I understand how he's this high up. But, kind of a good all around player, if a player who's wildly overpaid. I'll go with Nicholas Batum. Uh, 10.4 points per game for his career, 5 rebounds, 3.3 assists, decent, 3-point percentage. Free throws are fine. That's how you know I'm excited about a pick. Has the highest free throw percentage of anybody that's been picked so far. So,
Batum
bully
does.
for him, I guess. But he does, yeah. But
I've always
just
liked.
kind of
I've
a
always liked the game.
yeah. It does seem weird that he got as much money as he did, but apparently advanced numbers like him a lot. No All Star games, no like kind of I'm not sure what the term. I know it's considered like gray ink in baseball reference terms. I'll assume that's what it's called in basketball reference too, but it doesn't really have a lot of top line accomplishments. But has just generally been a solid player, and if you're not paying him a 9-figure contract, somebody you'd like to have on your team.
Yeah, so they had that Portland team with him, and I believe so. It was Damian Lillard was drafted. This is Brandon Roy gets hurt, and that
Yeah.
was like the Roy Aldridge and those guys, and then Aldridge stays on. They draft Lillard in an ill-fated. This was when Brooklyn was just messing up left and right, and they traded the pick that became Lillard, number 6, for Gerald Wallace, who was past his prime.
Oh God,
It
that's rough.
They made so many bad trades. People forget about that trade because everybody's focused on the Pearson KG trade. That trade was also absolutely terrible. So
Yeah, I do have this thing that I think it's a little bit unfair if you're like they traded Gerald Wallace for Damian Lillard because like they traded the pick, picks can become anything. But also you don't trade Gerald Wallace at that point in his career for that pick. So
that's it. It does end up. I do agree with you that you can't always judge it by who gets picked, but you can't trade an unprotected lottery pick for a washed-up Gerald Wallace. Terrible business.
yeah.
So when Aldridge leaves for San Antonio, that team kind of falls apart. Wes Matthews had just torn his Achilles, and Batum gets this huge offer from Charlotte. One, you're Charlotte. Two, you're owned by Michael Jordan, whose track record, GM wise, is iffy, we'll say. And that's where you end up paying Nick Batum that salary. And that contract was never good. And it the end of his Charlotte tenure was weird. They like just stopped playing him. And then he goes to the Clippers and becomes the role player he was probably destined to be to wind down his career. And it was kind of like, why didn't he play in Charlotte? I don't really know. I don't really know what went on in Charlotte, but I've liked what I've seen with the Clippers. I like what I've seen with the Sixers. I believe he is a free agent now. I don't know if he'd be interested in going to OKC, but that would be a nice little role player to have.
Yeah, I could see him as a towards the back of the bench.
Yeah, off the
Unless you want to
bench.
resign unless you want to resign Gordon Hayward.
You know, pretty sure Hayward lit that bridge on fire.
Yeah, I would say so.
He wasn't returning before that interview anyway, but that interview definitely dashed any hopes. I hope he I
All
hope he
right.
plays well. I hope he plays well for the Shanghai Sharks though.
All right, you're up at number 5. Or not number 5, you're number 5, number 9 overall.
Let's see here. I think I have to go Eric Gordon at this point.
Okay.
Clipper legend, traded for Chris Paul. You know what's really forgotten is his Pelicans tenure. So I feel like it's like he was on the Clippers for a while. I remember him being on the Rockets, but there's that time we had with the Pelicans that just it felt like he was injured a lot too. Um, Nice combo guard, good shooter, can create his own shot off the dribble, get to the bucket. Defense is but when you can get buckets, sometimes you don't have to be the best defender.
Yeah, agreed. Kind of definitely fits sort of the. He's probably him and Batum are, I guess, the first two guys where like it's just like really, really this guy's not going to be your star, but like no one. I think Eric Gordon got a bad contract at some point, didn't he? I feel like he did. Am I misremembering? Like bad
I
from a
remember
team
there was
perspective, obviously.
yeah there was I don't think it was ever that bad, but he might maybe on the Pelicans. I remember that, and I remember there was a time where the Suns were pursuing him, and I think that may have driven up the price on the Pelicans at that point. That may have happened. I remember him coming out of high school and college. He was highly touted, and that
Yeah,
didn't.
I remember there kind of being a perception that his college career was like a little underwhelming, and like he went 7th overall. It's not like he was like completely cratered, but
It did feel a little underwhelming with what what we heard about this guy going into Indiana.
yeah, I feel like I should also point out in the midst of doing this draft that I was mad that the Bulls were going to draft Derrick Rose because I really wanted them to draft Michael Beasley because I'm a very dumb guy who falls in love with kind of tweener forwards who dominate against weaker teams in college, and that's why I also thought that drafting Kyrie Irving over Derrick Williams was going to be just criminal malpractice.
I thought I was with you on both of those, and you actually kind of wonder, like, okay, how did I not learn my lesson with Michael Beasley? Now, in my defense, Irving's collegiate career was really underwhelming, mostly injury riddled, and so I just didn't. I Duke and Arizona played in the tournament, and Kyrie was. I didn't. Kyrie didn't blow me away. I guess I remember going back and looking at the numbers. His numbers actually were pretty good, but he didn't. It was Derek Williams that was like just everywhere, just dominating. But like you said,
Yeah.
it's the tweener forward. You're a bona fide power forward in college. You get to the pros, it's not quite like that.
Yeah, it sounds absolutely crazy in 2024 to be like Michael Beasley and Derrick Williams were like Kevin Durant like in college, but like they were that level of dominant in college. Obviously, they did not uh, have that level of dominance in the pros, but
Beasley was
they
better than Kevin Durant in college, straight up. He was unbelievable, and it did not carry over at all.
yeah. I mean, that was also, him playing at K State, being a Mizzou fan, seeing a lot of his games, and just being like, oh, this guy is like absurd. And
Yeah, and that's kind of where my Durant fandom took off. Was just a player that height being able to handle and shoot like that was like crazy. Like it was just frankly kind of unheard of. We really hadn't seen much of that.
yeah,
And then I that was kind of my days as a Pistons fan with Rashid. Rashid leaves Detroit. I'm obviously not going to root for Boston, and I chose a new team.
thank you for not choosing Boston. That was obviously would have gotten
Thank
you a title this year, but think
and also
about all of the ripple effects.
thank me for not sticking with Detroit. Good lord, they literally have not won one playoff game since that happened.
What if they hired Monty Williams again? Would that help? Would that give them playoff wins?
I don't think so. Not when I. I'm trying. I'm actually. You know what? I'm actually thinking about it because 2008 would have been an election year. The last time the Pistons won a playoff game, Bush was president. Think about that.
Huh. Yeah,
Tough
that's.
look.
I mean, there are some franchises where like you're like, when's the last time the Wizards won a playoff game? I'd be like, the first Bush? I don't know.
The
Some that
Wizards
seem
have
like
a
they've
playoff.
been.
The Wizards have a different futile statistic. A couple of them. They have not in the entire era of the 3-point line. They have not won 50 games. They have
Yeah,
not
I
made the
knew that
conference.
one.
Not made the
I,
conference
ugh.
finals. The Hornets, of course, it applies to them. They haven't done shit the whole time they've existed.
Yeah, we just had this conversation earlier today with Immaculate Grid and just how forgettable the Hornets' entire thing is. Hornets and
Right.
Wizards, two teams that have been touched by Michael Jordan.
He did not aid them in their quest, that's for sure.
I, of course, wisely became a Chicago Bulls fan after Michael Jordan left because I'm very smart and have very good timing.
That's when you started?
Yeah, I started in like early 2000s just because all their games were on WGN, and
Yeah.
I remember like rookie Eddie Curry and Tyson Chandler, and just it was it felt like they had a future. They kind of did. Like they eventually like made the playoffs, but it was not great.
Well, some of those
Anyway,
guys
I'm
had
gonna.
futures. They just weren't in Chicago.
Oh yeah, Tyson Chandler went on to have a nice little career, not with the Bulls.
Ron Artest.
So that's true. Uh, anyway, gonna move on to the number 10 pick. Gotta not think about Bulls players for a moment. I will go with Goran Dragic. So
Okay.
Dragic is he's the other player that I mentioned. There's four players in this draft that have received MVP votes. He was improbably one of them. It was deep MVP votes. It was a third team All NBA at one point. Um, Kind of one of those guys that I think is inevitably going to be a memory hold because he basically had like one or two like really strong seasons, then otherwise was just kind of like a guy. I have I have fond memories of for a while at my local Target. The only NBA jersey that was available was a Goran Dragic Heat jersey. Not really sure how that came about, but
That's amazing.
that is that is sort of just what it was. But yeah, he's a good um, offensive player for a little bit, and if I can get him at number 10 overall in kind of a so-so draft, then go with it.
Yeah, definitely a strong point guard. What was this MVP vote in Miami or Phoenix?
I want to say it was in Phoenix, but let me double check that.
There was a weird because he started his career in Phoenix. He ended up going to Houston for a couple years. Then I think when I want to say when Harden came over, he got traded back to Phoenix.
Yeah, because
And
there
I think
was
at that point, Nash was close to leaving, if not left, actually. And then Dragic ran the show. But then there was that period where they had Dragic, Isaiah Thomas, and Eric Bledsoe.
yeah, they just were like overrun with point guards. So it was 2013-14 with Phoenix. He finished 16th in MVP voting. He was third team All NBA. He won Most Improved Player, which
Yeah,
is not a real award, but he did win it. 20.3 points per game that year, 5.9 assists. Like he was a good player,
frankly, better
and
than
he
himself.
kind of
Yeah,
yeah didn't really. He finished sixth in sixth man of the year voting one time as well in 2019 or yeah 2019-20. Was an all star a couple years before that with Miami. Ultimately kind of he was in a weird position where even though he was playing as a backup for a while in Phoenix and playing behind Nash, when he came into his own, he was kind of just like one of the like highlight players on some not some great teams because like that 2013-14 Suns team did not win the title. I should note the one that was giving him enough shots to get 20 plus points per game, but someone has to get the points. And
yeah, came up a little short on that title, but yeah, I mean, like you said, getting a guard like that at 10, that's a solid pick. He was
all
kind of
right,
like the
number
face
11,
of
you're up.
he was like the face of the mediocre Heat teams that were kind of between LeBron and then when they got Jimmy Butler.
Yeah,
They traded multiple first round picks to get him. It's
yeah, that
actually
was
amazing.
probably
Riley did some reckless things, and then somehow dug out of it getting Jimmy Butler. It's pretty incredible. You,
Like he's like the modern Joe Dumars of every move is either really savvy or just an absolute train wreck. His hit rate's a little higher than Dumars, but
Dumars, Riley was up and down. Dumars is straight up like first half really good, and the line of delineation is trading Chauncey Billups. And that trade on everything was just awful. All right, number 11. Oh boy, you know what? I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna tell OJ Mayo to not smoke as much weed. He's gonna have a better career this time around. I'm gonna draft OJ Mayo,
all right, the grocery list, love it.
or at least be more aware of when testing dates are coming.
Yeah, just
Um,
you know,
there's a handful
he,
of players that have their best year, like they have a pretty good rookie year, and then that turned out to be the best year of their career.
yeah, because like he was, I believe he was all rookie. Like he was
Yeah.
like did not seem like a bust like
No.
immediately.
No. Um, Obviously, for whatever reason, things just did not quite pan out for him, and then he ends up getting booted out of the league at some point. On frankly,
Did
I
he
mean,
have any? So obviously he had a lot of weed suspensions. Did he have any other legal troubles besides? Because I feel like both he and Michael Beasley were both kind of just like they had one thing. It's certainly not the worst thing NBA players. It's certainly not the worst thing top three picks in this draft have been involved with. But things they just kept on doing.
yeah. To my knowledge, it was just weed. I'd probably have to go back and look it up. How, the back of my mind, I feel like he may have taken some PEDs too once.
Okay, well I also don't care about that, so that's fine.
I don't either, but yeah, it, you can only do so much, and they're going to kick you out. But talent wise, he's a good shooter. I think he would thrive in this era because he was a good 3-point shooter. He would put up more shots, decent defender. If his career pans out better, he goes higher in this free draft. And that's just that. He was a deserved number 5 pick of it. I can't remember the order, but him and Kevin Love are like right there.
Yeah, Mayo was third, Love was fifth,
That's
then
right. Then
Russ was
Russell.
between them. Yeah, I always do kind of wonder on these redrafts because there is a part of me that's like, if you're starting their careers over again, like, maybe Derrick Rose isn't gonna, have this awful injury. Like maybe, not to like have bad things happen to these guys, but like, Russ is going to the Hall of Fame, so who cares? But like, maybe there's a scenario where Russell Westbrook's career stalls out. He ends up in a bad situation. He's not able to kind of grow into what he became. But
Right.
yeah, obviously the version of OJ Mayo we got was not ideal, but
Right.
he had moments and he had talent, and um, also played against Michael Beasley in the first round of the tournament that year, if I remember correctly.
That does sound
The
right.
6-11 matchup.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like one of those things. Like if you play out his career 10 times, like a handful of times go better than what we saw.
Yeah, there's some variance there. All right, number 12. I am gonna go with a player that inspired so much confidence that he was able to be traded for the draft pick that became Kawhi Leonard, which, as we established, is not the proper way to evaluate players. But I'll go with George Hill. Just a well-rounded player, kind of part of me that wonders, like, obviously the Spurs were right to make that trade. They were obviously right to get Kawhi Leonard, but like, I feel like the Spurs would have still been pretty good without Kawhi. Like those couple years where they were going to like they wouldn't have been as good, but like they would have been a playoff team, for instance.
Oh yeah.
Like does George Hill have like a higher reputation, or is the fact that he got traded for Kawhi Leonard something that he can just like tell his grandkids about? And like it's almost like the Sam Bowie thing. Like if Sam Bowie had gone second overall, but number 3 was just like some guy, then he's just a guy that got hurt a lot.
I definitely think Sam Bowie being number 3 number two before Jordan helped him more than this George Hill thing. The thing, I don't know that the Spurs win another title, and
Yeah, I would agree with that.
that's kind of where I think being traded for Kawhi Leonard is the most famous thing of him. Another Thunder legend, I might add, George Hill. But
I don't think I
yeah,
knew
I mean,
that one, or forgot about it at least.
yeah, they what was that trade? The Thunder make so many trades that they start to, because he was on. It's all running together at this point. But he was on that team briefly with Al Horford.
Oh, he was like late. Okay, he was 2020, 2021. So
And then they traded.
he would.
Hill got hurt when they had Hill, Horford, and Shea and Lou and a few other idiots. They were like a 500 team. They were kind of scrappy. And then Hill got hurt, and then that was pretty much that. He didn't play again, and Horford got sent home, and Shea had plantar fasciitis. That one was more legit. The next year he had like a sprained ankle. That was like, yeah, maybe they're being overly cautious.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I will.
George Hill had a brief stint.
I'll also add that while George Hill is most famous for being traded and activating a title with Kawhi, George Hill was also, along with Eric Bledsoe, the point guards for the Milwaukee Bucks before they traded for Drew Holiday and then immediately won a championship.
Was he in
So
that trade? Because the
I
Drew
believe he
Holiday,
was. That,
because I believe they expanded that trade, and that Steven Adams transaction, I believe, was part of that trade. I believe that was a 3-team trade, and I believe that's how George Hill came over.
I believe that's correct. I'm trying to find trying to find George Hill's trade history on Basketball Reference, or his transactions, I should say. So he's part of some long trades.
Pardon me,
So
4-team,
20, yeah. So the
4-team.
Thunder
Imagine
involved,
those two.
Denver, Pelicans, yeah.
A lot of Thunder legends.
Then he was traded to the Sixers, and man, that's
I
he's
believe it
part.
kind of goes
I'm seeing
with
5 different trades on his page that are 3 or 4 team trades that are basically like a full paragraph, which actually kind of sums up the kind of player George Hill is. He's the kind of guy that like teams want him enough to trade for him, but he also ends up just kind of being thrown into some. Also, I don't think I realized. So I knew that the Kawhi Leonard thing. Obviously, I didn't also realize that Davis Bertans and Rizem Lorbeck were part of that trade. Lorbeck, I don't think ever played in the NBA, but multiple players, including Kawhi
Bertans.
Leonard. So yeah,
Bertans didn't,
apparently.
Bertans didn't come over for several years. That's funny. Drafted by the Indiana Pacers in the second round of the 2011 draft. And then his rights
Yeah,
got
and
traded.
he
That's funny. And then doesn't come over for 5 years. Another
he
Thunder
made his
legend.
NBA debut. Yeah, October 25th, 2016 is his debut. So took him a while.
Yeah, poor
All
George
right,
Hill had 2 different stints with the Bucks, but missed that title. Poor guy. He was definitely, I believe. Remember that player had that run in with Milwaukee Police and Sterling Brown and George Hill and them had like a pregame. I don't want to call it a mutiny necessarily. But they like pretty much like walked out or something. Did something. I gotta look that up again. But
Okay.
George Hill was big on that. Big and
Yeah, I can't say there was definitely because I think that was tied in with the like the bubble like Wildcat
yeah,
strike, if I remember
yeah.
correctly. Yeah.
I might be pulling 2 events into one that didn't actually happen, but he was definitely part of some kind of protest movement there, which is pretty cool.
It also definitely took me a while to remember that Sterling Brown is a basketball player. I thought you were talking about Sterling K. Brown, like the actor.
Fair.
But
There was a player named
I'm
Sterling
back.
Brown. All right, so you just picked George Hill at what? What was that? 10 or 12?
Plus 12. So we have
Mm,
each of us have one pick left until the conclusion of the lottery.
okay, and we're declining as it is, so we can probably just rattle
Yes.
off some names from there. I'm gonna go. There's honestly kind of there's a few interesting guys. This is a shooting league though, so I'm gonna go with the shoot. I'm gonna go with Ryan Anderson.
Okay.
Um, Ryan Anderson would be somebody that would be fun to have in the current Thunder. Just an absolute gunner. He fit in really well. He was with I think he start with New Jersey and got traded to Orlando, I believe.
He was definitely drafted by New Jersey.
Yeah, he got traded with Vince Carter in that trade. And then I know he was good friends with Dwight Howard. He played with Orlando for a little bit. He was with the Pelicans for a bit. He really flourished with Houston and D'Antoni. I mean, he was just born to play for Mike D'Antoni.
Yeah, he is the most like D'Antoni era Houston player that you could imagine.
And Eric Gordon's right behind him. So that was a nice little
Yeah.
trade they made with the Pelicans. Yeah, I mean, just a good shooter. Not a strong defender, but held his own enough, shot well enough that carved out a nice little career.
Yeah. Good choice. He was, a couple spots down from there for me, but get a good role player. I will say I've never been more certain that you were not going to take the player that I had up next. And whenever you said it's a shooting league, because the next player I have up is Roy Hibbert,
Yeah,
who Roy Hibbert's a very interesting case, I think, for this draft, just because like he only played 9 seasons. Other than OJ Mayo, like everybody else that we've drafted has played minimum 12. But
and that's
he
like,
was a guy who. Uh,
oh, what I was going to say is like, are you drafting for 2008 or are you drafting for 2024? These
oh, I'm
redrafts,
drafting.
you can kind of think of it in
Oh,
multiple
I'm
ways.
I'm absolutely drafting for 2008, but
Right.
it would be a real uphill climb to kind of find a spot for Roy Hibbert because honestly, he's a guy who like you know what seemed like was midway through his career, basically the league changed in a way that made him like unplayable. But for a while when he was with the Pacers, like he was like legitimately a contributor to some teams that were, I never thought they were winning the title, but like they took the LeBron Heat to Game 7 with him as their center. He was a two-time All-Star. He was an All-Defensive Second Team. Got a couple DPOI votes. Just broadly speaking, like outside of so at that point, I mean Paul George would have been the best player on that team. I'd been a little bit post Danny Granger. But like he was up there for like next best players on that team, along with like Lance Stevenson or some other names you probably haven't thought about for a
David
few
West.
years. David West, yeah, who I thought about earlier whenever I mentioned him as the fifth best player in the 2003 draft. But yeah, obviously Roy Hibbert does not have the sustainable career to justify picking him any earlier than this. But also, you have a guy who's a multiple time All Star, and you're getting him with the last pick of the lottery. I'm kind of willing to take that because, like, needless to say, there's nobody else that's here that's even like defensible. Like, there are guys who would be defensible here. There's nobody left who you're like, how could you possibly pass up? You know,
Yeah, no, that's correct.
Omar Oshik, so you could get Roy Hibbert. Like,
No, it's getting real nasty real quick after this.
I will say Omar Oshik is a player who I remember being better than his stats told me he was. There was no way I was going to take him here, but looking at his numbers on here, I was like, oh my god.
He was
It
a
was bad.
backup too much, honestly. Then he also
Yeah.
had, I feel like ran into those back problems and had a few years tainted with where he's playing a backup role, so the overall numbers don't look good. But then he also, so then he leaves the Bulls, goes to Houston on one of those poison pill contracts,
Yeah.
but then within a year or two, it's like, oh, Dwight Howard's available. Oh, we'll take Dwight Howard. Now all of a sudden, he's a backup again. I feel like his starting numbers are solid, but he just didn't get nearly enough opportunities to start.
think it also might just be that every player on the 2010-11 Bulls I just think is better than they actually were.
That's entirely possible.
The
Oh,
next player that I had on my board, who obviously will not go in the lottery, Olympic gold medalist that I passed up, JaVale McGee was the 18th pick in this draft. He was actually the pick after Hibbert, and he was the guy behind Hibbert on my board.
yeah. So I had, yeah, I had McGee in that range. I've got like honestly, like I've even gone off my list slightly at times, but basically I have McGee, got Mario Chalmers, got DJ Augustine. After that, I've got
Yeah,
Beasley. It felt like a good place to throw him in there, I guess.
yeah.
Ro-
Augustine was the next was 15th on my board. So
okay. Then I've got Robin Lopez,
yeah,
Jared Bayless. That's probably a little bit too high for Jared Bayless, honestly. We really are at a point where I start just listing off names. I don't even like where Bayless is at on this list. I Courtney Lee had a few years as a role player. We've got Thunder legend Anthony Morrow, undrafted style. The two
had
undrafted guys that I dug up were him and Mozgov.
yeah, Timothy Mozgov is a guy that I definitely have a much higher opinion of than there's any actual evidence of, just because like he was playing in finals. They were not there because of him, but he was playing in big games, so therefore I assumed he must be um, awesome. But
At the bottom of my list is the ultimate, much higher opinion of than actual reality. Can you guess who I'm talking about?
I'm gonna say it's the guy that I have at the bottom of my list, which is Maurice Spates.
No, I didn't. I just thought he was all right.
Yeah,
Anthony Randolph. You probably you may not
yeah,
have been in the NBA enough to know the Anthony.
he was way low on my list, but yeah, he was 27th, I think.
If you just look at the numbers, it's yeah, he's really underwhelming. I want to say I got to look this up to be sure. I want to say this was the when they flipped Jason Richardson. That may not be entirely correct, but Anthony Randolph on the Warriors was just like the potential, like future Kevin Garnett type shit with this guy, like the all around game that he would every once in a while, he'd have that game where he had the double double. He had some highlights. He could dribble the ball. Tall guy like 6'10". He was 27th on your board for a reason because this guy did not pan out. But the hype at the time for those couple years in Golden State was through the roof, and he just couldn't put it together.
Look, I remember when the Bulls had Marcus Fizer. I know what it's like to see a guy who it seems like should be better than he actually is.
Oh,
I look very upset that I mentioned Marcus Fizer.
yeah, that pick never made sense to me. That
To
pick
be
was
clear,
not it.
I was not paying enough attention to know any better. Like that's one where I was wrong on, but also I was not that committed to it. Eric Williams being the next like great player in the NBA, I firmly believed, and I was like a full on adult when I thought that.
Yeah, yeah. Marcus Fire. I got fooled on Bees. I got fooled on Derek Williams. I did not get fooled on Marcus Fire. That was not it. I've also got Nikola Pekovic from Minnesota.
Yeah, I was surprised that he like his stats weren't better. I guess he just didn't play as long as I feel like I remember him
Yeah,
playing longer than 6 years. It doesn't seem like that should like
yeah.
not that he was a great player, but I thought he was
Yeah.
okay.
He had a couple years with him and Kevin Love in the paint in Minnesota were fun. That dude just looked like he just ate opponents. He was just unbelievable, just an absolute beast. And then just like that, back to Europe. I feel like he had some injuries in there too.
All right, yeah, there's not really anybody else on my board that I really have any comment on whatsoever. I think you've mentioned everybody that was even remotely entertaining. You briefly mentioned Robin Lopez, who's just
Yeah.
one player to mention, just because somebody that's really kind of coasted on Brook.
One last guy I'll mention is Jason Thompson. Just felt like the ultimate Sacramento King of just pure mediocrity. We are going nowhere. Somehow he stayed on that team for like 8 years. Just the
Yeah,
ultimate Sacramento team.
so I was thinking about this a little bit whenever you had mentioned the Warriors, whenever you'd mentioned Anthony Randolph, but the period of time where the Kings were like one of like the most fun teams in the NBA. Like obviously this was before this draft, like Chris Webber, Bibby, and Asia, that team, and then like how irrelevant Golden State was basically my entire life up until Steph Curry. I mean, they had the We Believe team was like fun, but as far as like championship contenders, never really were anything worth mentioning. Basically they beat the Mavericks. They Charles Sprewell choked his coach, and that's pretty much like the extent of like thoughts I had about the Golden State Warriors up until Steph.
Well, yeah. So the Warriors were I mean the Warriors were the Kings. Those were just two
Yeah,
Northern California teams that couldn't get their shit together. Um, they had the number one pick, Joe Smith. That guy did nothing. Mike Dunleavy, Troy Murphy. They just had all these guys that like,
I will say
they
I think the Minnesota Timberwolves might disagree that Joe Smith did nothing.
he did something to their franchise. You draft Gilbert
Sure
Arenas to
did.
kind of get hosed because you couldn't pay him. There was like restrictions on how much they could pay him. He becomes an unrestricted free agent. The one pick they have, they lose. They do the We Believe thing. 2008, they won like 48 games and missed the playoffs because the West was
That's
so
wild.
stacked. And then end up screwing up Baron Davis's free agency, and you lose Baron Davis. Baron Davis was going to LA to play with Elton Brand, who spurned LA at the last minute and goes to Philadelphia. So now Baron Davis is in LA by himself. He's not happy. Warriors aren't happy. Nobody's happy. And then, they draft Steph and I think Steven Jackson was briefly a teammate of his. They had to get him out of there expeditiously.
Yeah,
Um,
that sounds right.
and then yeah, I mean, Steph obviously had the run at Davidson. I thought he'd be a decent pro. I didn't think it would obviously balloon into an
Yeah,
all time dynasty.
I definitely was like excited for him in the NBA. There was no part of me that was like, oh, he is like let's put it this way. I thought he was better than Johnny Flynn. I think that was based on what limited I knew about Ricky Rubio. I probably would have taken Rubio ahead of him, but Johnny Flynn, there was no chance. No.
You take 2 point guards, and neither of them are Steph Curry. Yikes.
It's rough. Like
I don't believe Khan has been employed by any other NBA team since Minnesota finally rectified that situation.
probably for the best.
Yeah,
One thing I do want to mention about just kind of to go back to the sort of beginning of our conversation, like with Russell Westbrook, I feel like so 3 years in a row, the Sonics slash Thunder franchise have top four picks, and they like ace all of them. They get Durant in '07, they get Westbrook '08, James Harden '09. So Durant made sense. I think everybody was kind of like pretty much everybody agreed that Durant was a top two pick. Like there were way more people saying he should have gone one than saying he should have gone three, for instance. I
yeah.
feel like Westbrook and Harden were kind of they seemed like kind of reaches at the time, or at least like didn't seem like they were going to be like James
West,
Harden, especially. I remember being like, he's number three.
they
Huh.
both were. Russ was definitely because Russ didn't really, he really wasn't viewed as like a point guard. And he was viewed as a reach as well. And
Yeah, and like I sort of remember him in college because he was teammates with Kevin Love, and like they made the Final Four, and I remember I picked them to win the tournament that year. Still not sure how that didn't happen, but like
yeah,
that team was just like part of it's probably just because Russell Westbrook was surrounded by all his talent, didn't really like think about it because like Darren Collison was there too, and I think he was actually the one running the point at that point. But like Russell Westbrook just didn't seem like he seemed like oh he's an interesting player. Like if you had like a mid to late first round pick, maybe you take a flyer on a bit number four, and then he ended up being number one in this redraft, and he was going to be number one no matter which one of us was picking first.
yeah. I don't think anybody saw a future Hall of Fame point guard, in that. And early on in his career, there was calls for he's not the point guard, he's a shooting guard, get a real point guard, yada yada yada. Obviously, Thunder stuck to their guns and were paid off. Um, but that was that year that um, they had that was four number one seeds in the Final
Yeah,
Four. So while they were loaded, it's not like they were the only loaded team in that run.
it was a tough group because they lost to Memphis, I want to say, in the Final Four.
That sounds right.
That was obviously the Derrick Rose team, so not like they got knocked out by somebody irrelevant.
Right.
All right, let's recap our draft picks. So Team P Funk, we have Russell Westbrook, Derrick Rose, Serge Ibaka, Danilo Gallinari, Eric Gordon, OJ Mayo, and Ryan Anderson. Team John, we have Kevin Love, Brooke Lopez, DeAndre Jordan, Nicholas Batum, Goran Dragic, George Hill, and Roy Hibbert. That is, it's weird because I think that ultimately this draft is it's fine. I think it's like definitely a better draft than the other one that you were on the podcast for 2013, where there's
Yeah.
you know Giannis, Rudy Gobert, and a cloud of dust, basically.
Yeah.
But
It was
it's
like pick
also
sports. Like I don't know who to pick.
yeah. But there was a point where I feel like Russ is a guy who I've maintained a relatively steady opinion on, but if we had redone this draft, 3 or 4 years into it, I'm taking Derrick Rose number one. It's not even a question.
Yeah.
And Kevin Love was a guy who, probably at that point I'd have been taking Kevin Love over Russell Westbrook, and those guys just kind of fell off. And you know maybe the most extreme example of this is the guy that I took last in the lottery of Roy Hibbert, where I mean there was no point where Roy Hibbert is going early. He's not going top four in this draft at any point. He might have gone four at some point, but he was never going top three at any point, I should say. We'll just be conservative there, but
Yeah.
just a guy that really falls off, and a few of these guys just kind of did not. These guys got older, and this I'm not sure if you knew this, but this would have been my first draft eligible draft. If I'd come out, if I'd been a one and done out of Truman State University, I would have been able to declare for this draft.
Could have been
I think Kevin
non-drafted
Love.
free.
I think Kevin Love might be younger than me. Let me check that. I'm almost positive OJ Mayo is.
When I looked up
Kevin
George Hill,
Love.
I was going to say when I looked up George Hill, he's only a year younger than me. That dude stayed at Ooey Pooey for like 5 years, I guess.
Okay, it appears that Kevin Love and OJ Mayo are both older than me, not by an enormous amount by any means, but I feel like at least one of these guys is younger than me, and I feel like now I have to go through the draft picks and find the first guy ever drafted who was my junior, so I can hope they're still in the NBA and therefore not feel. Michael Beasley's very barely older than me. That's actually a close call. I can't imagine there's another person in the world who cares about what I'm doing right now, but let's see. I'm just going to keep doing this probably all night. I was really hoping that Joe Alexander was going to end up being the one guy who was younger than me, but it looked like he was 21 when he got drafted and spent 2 years in the NBA as a number 8 overall pick. So, good try. All right. We could probably go ahead and get this wrapped up. Before we tie a bow on this one, anything else you want to say? Anything you want to promote? Any guys that you want the Thunder to draft tomorrow? / guys you want to see the Thunder trade their pick for?
Yeah, I really don't care about drafting anybody. If they actually did draft somebody, I would take Cody Williams, Jalen Williams' brother. The vibes obviously would be immaculate. 6'9", 6'10" forward with skill. Can't have enough of those. But truthfully, I would love to see a trade of some sort. Two former Thunder guys, Paul George, Kevin Durant. Paul George is readily available. Kevin Durant, not
Yeah.
as much. Kevin Durant's 2-year deal fits better into what the Thunder are doing than Paul George probably wanting more than 2 years.
New contract, yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, at this point, the Thunder have youth. The Thunder have some cost controlled guys. It's time to me. It's time to make a splash.
I just got an ESPN alert about a trade. Have you seen this news?
No,
Honestly, this one probably doesn't warrant getting an ESPN alert. Knicks sending Bojan Bogdanovic, comma bevy of picks to Nets for forward Mikal Bridges.
really,
Yeah,
really,
I'm curious what the
wow.
picks are, but yeah, that's
4 unprotected first round picks. Holy
what?
shnikes.
Oh my! They did the Paul George trade? Oh man. Okay.
Whoa, whoa, okay. Four unprotected picks, a protected first round pick via Bucks. That's top 5. That's a decent one, but the Bucks are still probably
An
too good.
unprotected pick swap.
God.
Oh my god.
Ooh.
God, are the Knicks better be good this year because which I mean they were good this last year, but that's a lot. Okay. We probably got to cut this off before we go completely down this wormhole because
That's
I feel like
crazy.
I feel like everything we said about the Paul George trade being like the craziest like assembly of picks ever has immediately become outdated. The first I thought was like, oh, Bridges, he's pretty good, and then it's like he ain't that good. Like let's settle down. But all right, where can people find you on Twitter? I always forget the number of underscores in your handle, so I ask that
One
you read it off
underscore
to me.
T underscore funk 36. If you want a bunch of NBA and stupid tweets, please go ahead and follow me, but don't feel pressure to do so.
Yeah, it's there. You can be followed. You're not going to stop like unless you've blocked somebody. You're not stopped from following him.
Yeah, there's a reason I'm at like 700 followers. I think that's about right.
Yeah, you don't want too many followers because that means that you're not being true to yourself.
There was a time I wanted more followers. Now I don't care. I've got enough. We're good. I got my little corner of
Yeah,
Twitter.
I've very much plateaued, but it also means that I'm in a spot where I can just tweet incessantly about whatever stupid nonsense I want, and no one's getting mad about it because like they're used to it. People know what the deal is.
Right.
Like whatever, he's just tweeting through it. He'll get over it eventually. But if you are listening and you don't know what I'm talking about, John JF125. It's also my handle on Blue Sky, which P Funk is also on, but I think he only goes to it whenever he's suspended from Twitter. So probably not going to get that much content there. But
Yeah, I forget I have Blue Sky. I'll be honest with you.
yeah, it's just I will say it has gotten past the stage where everyone just talks about how much better it is than Twitter. So that part's good, but
Yeah.
it's has less fascists, which is good, but also a lot more like lame and boring people. So
Mm.
you know, higher floor, lower ceiling, I'd say.
There you go.
All right, let's call this a wrap, and let's hope for some sort of craziness in the draft tonight, and or some sort of crazy trades, or maybe the Nets flip Bridges for somebody. We'll see.
Nets will have the Nets. It's funny this happened right at the tail end of this podcast. So I'm interested to see what more moves the Nets will make.
We're gonna have to record an emergency pod like during the draft tomorrow to talk about this. All right, bye everybody.